Hi, I'm Pastor Jeremy, and this is The Next Generation, where we create videos for you as parents to help you disciple your children into the mature believers that you want them to be. Now, today we're looking at high school, and specifically we're looking at the discipline of fellowship. And I've stationed myself outside the dorm rooms here at UNM because dorm life and the fellowship that happens on campus and the fellowship that's beginning to happen with your high school student is going to be a barrier for them meeting together with the body of believers. Let me tell you something. What happens in high school with the education and all the extra things that are beginning to happen in their life, that we're making more of an emphasis on their education, they're getting their driver's license, they're starting to enter the workforce. And so we get all of these different things that begin to happen, and they're starting to pull at your children to knock away necessary things toward their relationship with Jesus Christ and toward their relationship, in this case, with the body of believers. So what happens during this time? Well, a lot of times what happens is that kids will want a place of their own. And so we have, I know as we shared in our mid-high time, we have a place that's a youth room, which is an outreach fellowship time for high schoolers and mid-hires to reach their friends for Jesus Christ. But I think it needs to be said that in and of itself isn't really being part of the church. It's being part of an outreach to try and get people inside the church. But they themselves need to be part of an intergenerational ministry. And especially at the high school level, that intergenerational ministry needs to go beyond the idea of that they're just part of the youth group. And so they need to become an active part of the fellowship of believers wherever your children might be at. They need to be coming to church with you. They need to be participating in church. They need to be using their gifts, talents, and to service the people around there. As a matter of fact, it says in Ephesians chapter 4 that the only way that your children are going to become mature is through the body of believers. We see that the body is indispensable in 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and in Romans chapter 12, that everybody has different parts, which means that your youth at this high school age are an indispensable part of the full life of the body. And if they don't get engaged at this age, it's going to be easy for them not to be engaged as they grow older. One of the things I want to tell you is when I first became a youth pastor here at the church that I serve at, there was a distinction, there was a clear break between the youth group and the church. To some extent that still exists, but we see our youth group now as more of an outreach time and not really part of the church, as more of an outreach to try and get people into the church. But back then, that was considered by the youth and by the people who were there, this was their church time. And there was a fear from people who were graduating out of high school and going into college of entering what they would call, quote unquote, big church. They didn't want to go to big church. They didn't want to necessarily grow up and be a part of that. And what needed to happen was a transition time while they're in this high school age to actually become part of the congregation, part of the church. I consider them doing this around 15, 16 years old, where they're coming in, they can help out with children, they can help serving things, they can help with the technological things of the service within the church. And that's really important for them to do because they become a contributor within the fellowship of believers. Now, as far as fellowship is concerned, it's going to be important because during this time, your kids are going to be tempted in so many different ways to knock out of this fellowship of believers. They're going to come up with excuses. Mom, it's boring. Mom, Dad, I don't want to be there. Dad, those sermons drone on and on and on, whether it's myself or the pastor at your church. And the truth of the matter is, we need to talk to our kids that the fellowship of believers is necessary. Not just because we say it's necessary, but because Jesus says it's necessary. So by looking at those passages in 1 Corinthians 12, and we look at Romans chapter 12, and we look over at Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 through 16. And we talk about Hebrews chapter 10, where it says, that we shouldn't fail to meet together, as some are in the habit of doing, but that we should encourage one another. And all the more as we see the day of Christ approaching. We need to point these passages to our kids and let them know that, look, this whole idea of meeting together, every one another passage that we see in the scriptures is believer on believer in community with one another, that God God desires us to be in community, that He's never imagined His church would be in disunity with one another. And we need to make sure that our kids don't fall prey to this movement that's happening today, this whole idea that they're spiritual but not religious, yes, they're spiritual but not religious, not the other way around. And that's the whole idea. They've associated the idea of organized religion as being something that is bad, but Jesus has used it as the catalyst for their growth. So by cutting that out, they will no longer grow in their relationship with Jesus Christ. And they need to be reminded that the fellowship of believers spurs us on in all of these 6 areas that we've been talking about throughout this series: in prayer, in Bible reading, in discipleship, in outreach and service, in giving, and in fellowship. And it starts with fellowship. It has to start with fellowship. Fellowship is where we're reminded about all of these other disciplines as well as fellowship. It reminds us of the things that we're supposed to be doing as believers together with one another. Some of the biggest things that your kids will be doing during this time is getting tired. Let me just tell you, they're growing, they're getting older, they're getting involved in more and more activities. And as I shared in one of these other videos that we just shot, is the whole idea that this time in their life, they're as free as they're ever going to be. Life is only going to get busier. And so we have to make sure that these disciplines are something that we're protecting. There's something that they're important to us. There's something that we're not going to give up so easily. And unfortunately, for so many youth today, especially high school youth, one of the biggest things that keeps them from the church, when I've been encouraging youth, I'm tired. I got to go to sleep. I needed my rest. I was up till 2 a.m. It's so funny, but if I were to ask them why they were up until 2 a.m, it's going to be like, I watched this movie, or I was out with friends, or maybe I was studying. All of these other things were very important to them, but the fellowshipping of believers wasn't. And I want to encourage you as parents that your kids are going to have to understand that coming into fellowship with other believers is a sacrifice of time. It's got to be something that's important to them. It has to be something that they're willing to do because they want to obey Jesus and do what's right. As parents, it's important that you tell your teenage youth, your 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grader, that as long as that you're under that house, they're under the roof of your house, they got to be coming to church with you, because you see this as necessary. See, as your children grow, they go through different phases, and you're going to hit this phase in high school as well, where they're going to be pushing against things that you've established as parents. And a big part of that is the gathering of believers and some of these disciplines of faith. And what they're doing is they're testing you. I call it pushing on the bubble. They're trying to expand their horizons and become freer, but they're trying to test what is real, what is something that is non-negotiable, and what is negotiable. Their bedtime at 10 o'clock at night might be negotiable. We might push it to 11 o'clock. But the gathering together of believers, that's got to be a non-negotiable. That's got to be saying, you know what, but this is so important, I'm not willing to give on it. Going to camp as a youth should be negotiable. It's not something everybody does. It's great if you're able to go, and it's going to be a faith-encouraging event, but it's not a necessary thing. But the gathering together of believers should be. Your children at this age, if your church is involved in small groups, should be entering at 16 years old the small groups of the church so that they can have intergenerational, intimate ministry outside of just a youth group setting. They need that type of fellowship. We're going to talk more about that as we get into the time of discipleship, because there's so much to talk about there. But this is where fellowship and discipleship intermingle with one another, because this is a necessary time for your kids so that they are understanding as their horizons are broadening. One of the best horizons that can help them become the mature adults that you want them to be in the faith is to make sure that fellowship of believers every week coming together is built upon and is not lacking. I pray this helps you to hold on to those convictions, to build this in your kids so that when they step out, they will understand just how important it is that they're involved in a body of believers to encourage them. God bless you. I'll talk to you next time. Hey, thanks for watching. If you'd like more great content and more videos like these to help you as parents disciple your kids, subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also like us on Facebook. Also, if there's a question that you have or a subject that you'd like to see covered in a future video, comment below on either one of these things and we will try and make sure that we cover these in a timely manner. God bless you guys, and we'll see you next time.